Change is needed in our laws dealing with immigration. 4 presidents have called attention to the serious defects in this legislation. Action is long overdue. Over the years, ancestors of all of us migrated to these shores. Men and women migrated here from every quarter of the globe. By their hard work and their enormously varied talents, they hewed a great nation out of a wilderness. By their dedication to liberty and equality, they created a society reflecting man's most cherished ideals. And that's an excerpt from President Lyndon B. Johnson's special message to the Congress on immigration in January of 1965. In part 1 of this discussion, we reviewed the circumstances and debates around passage of the Immigration Act of 1924 and the Immigration Act of 1952. In the second part, we examined the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 and the Trump administration's immigration policy priorities. Now, we recognize the sensitivity of discussing what has long been a polarizing and contentious subject in the US body politic. This discussion, however, all the more necessary, is intended to provide a review of key aspects of legislations germane to an immigrant community in the US and the historical context through which to assess some of the dramatic changes unfolding around us. We neither advocate for nor oppose any particular policy position. And that said, we turn our attention to the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, or the Hart-Celler Act. Now, after passage of the 1952 bill, it was almost a consensus that the law did not go far enough to reform the quota system of immigrant selection. And the confluence of the violent anti-Semitic attacks against Jewish people, the state-sponsored repression faced by Jews in post-war Europe, post-World War II Europe, then there was civil rights movements, intensified pressure here on the federal government to end legal segregation. There were Cold War considerations. An immigration policy perceived as discriminating based on race did not sell as good foreign policy. Additionally, labor unions here switched their support for immigration reform. Previous laws like the 1924 law saw labor unions like the American Federation of Labor, AFL, lobby to tighten immigration restrictions. But in 1955, after merging with the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, and this is a federation of unions that had thousands of immigrants in their membership, the leadership pivoted in support of strengthening President Johnson's push for immigration reform. And that helped to influence the Hart-Celler Act, named after Senator Philip A. Hart of Michigan, and the only legislator in Congress for passage of both the 1924 and 1965 laws. That is Representative Emanuel Celler, representing New York's 10th Congressional District and mentioned earlier in the discussion. This law overhauled the U.S. immigration system. It dramatically expanded the volume and composition of immigrants to the U.S. And let's look quickly at 3 important changes arising from the Hart-Celler Act. 1, it ended the policy of limiting immigrants based on the country of origin quotas that was put in place by the 1924 Act. 2, it capped the number of annual visas to 290,000, allowing about 20,000 visas per country per year. And for the first time, it introduced these numerical caps on immigration from the Western Hemisphere. And so before 1965, there was no numerical cap on how many people could come to the US from Latin America and Canada. Now, and it was these numerical caps that really brought about this whole notion of illegal immigrants from Mexico that did not necessarily exist in that way before. And 3, the law refined the family reunification focus. It allowed priority access to entry to spouses, children, and parents of American citizens without those numerical caps. And this is in part what contributed to the dramatic increase in immigration from various countries, notably like Latin America and the Caribbean, where I'm from, and Asia, significantly changing the demographic landscape of the US, resulting in a more diverse US population. For example, according to the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey and a Pew Research Center survey, the non-Hispanic white population in the US decreased from about 84% in 1965 to about 56.3% of the US population in 2024. Since President Donald Trump assumed office for his second term earlier this year, the administration has taken several serious executive actions already stemming the tide of illegal immigration, but will potentially reduce legal immigration as well. For example, just a few days ago, the White House shared an article noting the dramatic reductions in the number of undocumented immigrants crossing the southern border to historic lows. The administration has also implemented expanded and new travel bans on nationals from several countries and has drastically reduced the number of refugees being admitted to the U.S. We'll take a look at 4 concrete policy measures so far. 1. Executive Order 14159, titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion. And this directed expanded use of expedited removal for undocumented immigrants across the U.S., period. And then it directs federal agencies to enforce immigration laws more strictly, including prioritizing registration of certain non-citizens and revoking previous programs. One of the key directives prevents sanctuary jurisdictions from receiving federal funding if they provide public benefits to undocumented immigrants. 2, there's Executive Order 14161, protecting the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public safety threats. And this mandates enhanced vetting for all immigration processes, including social media screening for visa applicants. It directs federal agencies to identify countries with deficient screening and vetting procedures and to ensure stricter oversight and potential restrictions for nationals from those nations. It also includes measures for assimilation. 3, Executive Order 14165, securing our border. This ended the catch and release policy, which allowed asylum seekers to await their court dates in the U.S. and directs several policies to increase border security, including resumption of the construction of the border wall, expansion of detention and removal operations, and termination of certain parole programs. 4, the One Big Beautiful Bill funds dramatic expansions of U.S. immigration detention system. It immediately gives the Department of Homeland Security $45 billion to detain immigrant adults and families, available through September 1929. And this sum quadruples the Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) annual detention budget, adding approximately $11.25 billion every year. Without doubt, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, signed into law at the foot of the Statute of Liberty by President Lyndon B. Johnson, ushered in far-reaching changes that are in part at the root of some of the current immigration challenges. While the tireless work of U.S. presidents, activists, and legislators like Representative Hart-Celler to reform U.S. immigration policy deserve the gratitude of every post-1965 immigrant in this country, those efforts simultaneously unleashed powerful demographic waves that help to shape the nation today still. And we need not look too far for an example. Democratic nominee Zoran Mamdani recently declared winner in the New York City election for mayor. The 34-year-old Uganda-born is being described as the first Muslim of South Asian descent and only the second youngest American man to be mayor in New York City's history. If we dare say, a phenomenon that calls to mind President John F. Kennedy's efforts to codify the U.S. as a nation of immigrants and his contributions to the passage of the 1965 bill before his unfortunate assassination in 1963. Kennedy's vision of immigration policy, though, was in part inspired by French sociologist and political theorist Alexis de Tocqueville's seminal work, Democracy in America, published in 1835 after Tocqueville's study of America's culture and politics. Both Tocqueville and Kennedy described the U.S. as a society of immigrants who began life on an equal footing. To Tocqueville, this was the unique character of this nation, of people who dared to explore new frontiers, eager to build their lives in a society that did not restrict their actions, their rights, and freedoms of choice and action. And then Kennedy memorialized the visible contributions of immigrants across every spectrum of what he called political, economic, and social life in America, in religion, in politics, in business, in arts, in education, in athletics, in entertainment, and in almost every segment of the broader labor force. Immigrants, he believed, continue to enrich and strengthen the fabric of American life. And this is still true today, even in the era of making America great again. Still, after this cursory review of some of the major pieces of immigration legislation in U.S. history, it begs the question whether some of the criticism directed at the Trump administration's immigration policies are perhaps somewhat exaggerated. Controversial as that may seem, once you understand the pre-1965 laws, it becomes abundantly clear that restrictive immigration laws long predate this current administration. You know what else becomes abundantly clear? That citizenship in the US was never given and should never be taken for granted. The opportunities that we enjoy, the rights, the freedoms in this exceptional land came at great cost. So the next time you think of immigrants in America, remember the words of former Harvard historian and author of the 1941 publication Boston's Immigrants, and then the 1951 Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Uprooted, Dr. Oscar Handlin. Handlin was once cited as saying, "Once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America. Then I discovered immigrants were the history of America." End of quote. Thank you for the opportunity to share on this serious matter, very important to our community. If you're an immigrant and you took the time to look at this video, good on you. If you're not an immigrant and you watch this video, great on you. Now take the next step and support the community. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow Guyana Tapestry on every social media platform: Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and stay engaged and connected with the community and diaspora. Family, this is Guyana Tapestry. I am Pelham Van Kooten, and here we're telling Guyana's immigration story. And until our next story, it's One Love GT.